You're a burden, Dad. We can't keep carrying you anymore. Those words hit me harder than the winter wind slapping against my face that night. My son didn't even look at me when he said it, just stood there in his pristine kitchen, polished granite countertops shining under bright white lights, like my entire life's work was nothing but background noise. I remember the weight of my cane pressing into my palm as I steadied myself, not because I needed it, but because the fury boiling inside me made my legs tremble. For years I had sacrificed everything for Michael. Double shifts, second mortgages, sleepless nights, and here he was, dismissing me like a worn-out coat left hanging in the garage. The air in that kitchen felt sterile, colder than the January wind outside. His wife, Claire, leaned against the marble island with her arms crossed, her lips pursed in that smug little smile she always wore when she thought she'd won. "It's not healthy for you to stay here," she added, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You need supervision. A nursing facility would be best." A burden, a facility, my home, the one I'd paid off with bloody hands and decades of sacrifice, was suddenly a staging ground for my exile. I glanced at the oak dining table where Michael once scribbled his homework while I worked through my bills late at night. I'd built that table myself, sanding it down until it gleamed like polished gold. Back then, he used to look at me with admiration, as though I was the strongest man alive. Now, his eyes were calculating, cold, already planning a future without me in it. I swallowed the anger burning in my throat, forcing a bitter smile. A burden, huh? My voice came out low, steady, like the silence before a storm. Michael shifted uncomfortably, maybe realizing for the first time that I wasn't going to cry, beg, or plead. Behind him, the grandfather clock I had restored ticked steadily, each second pounding like a war drum. Tick, you're useless. Tick, you're unwanted. Tick, time to be discarded. But here's what my son didn't know. I had been preparing for this moment long before he found the courage to spit those words at me. Every receipt, every deed, every legal paper I'd tucked away wasn't just nostalgia, it was ammunition. And if they thought I was going to fade quietly into some nursing home, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. That night, under the sterile glow of their kitchen lights, I decided something with absolute clarity. If they wanted war, then war was exactly what they would get. The drive back to my house that night felt heavier than usual, like the steering wheel itself carried the weight of betrayal. The snow on the roadside glistened under the streetlights, but all I could see was Michael's face, those cold eyes, the sharp edge of his voice repeating inside my head. "You're a burden, Dad." I had heard cruel words before in my life, bosses yelling at me on construction sites, strangers muttering insults when I came home covered in dust and grease, but nothing cut deeper than hearing it from my own son. When I stepped into my house, the warmth of the radiator wrapped around me like an old blanket. Familiar, safe, the smell of cedar lingered in the hallway, the same scent I remembered from when my wife Evelyn decorated the place every Christmas with wreaths and candles. She'd been gone for 6 years now, and the silence she left behind never got easier. I took off my coat, hung it on the rack we'd bought together 30 years ago, and walked slowly into the living room. My eyes landed on the old recliner, Evelyn's favorite spot. The leather was cracked and faded, but to me it was a throne. She used to sit there with a cup of chamomile tea, reading her novels while I pretended not to watch her smile. Now the chair sat empty, a monument to everything I'd lost. I sat down heavily, letting the memories wash over me. I thought about all the years I'd worked to give Michael the life I never had. Double shifts at the steel plant, nights crawling into bed when the sky was already light. Evelyn would rub the tension out of my shoulders while I calculated which bills could wait and which ones couldn't. The tuition payments, the braces, the car I co-signed when his credit was too weak. I remembered his 10th birthday, when I built him a treehouse in the backyard. Every nail, every plank carried the sweat of my hands. Michael had climbed up with his friends, shouting with joy, and I had felt like the richest man alive just watching his laughter fill the air. But the years changed him. Success wrapped around him like armor, and Claire's influence sharpened his words into weapons. He stopped visiting on weekends, stopped asking for advice. The boy who once looked at me like a hero now looked at me like a liability. I leaned forward, my hands trembling, not from age but from anger. On the mantel sat a photograph of Evelyn holding Michael on his first day of school. She was smiling proudly, her hair tied back, while Michael clutched a backpack that looked too big for his little shoulders. I had taken that photo, proud beyond words. Now, staring at it, all I could think was, she would never forgive him for this. The grandfather clock chimed from the hallway, its deep, echoing tone filling the house with a kind of judgment. Each strike reminded me of Evelyn's warning before she passed. Don't let them take advantage of you, Harold. You've given enough. Promise me you'll protect yourself. I hadn't kept that promise. Not until now. The house felt alive with memories. The worn banister under my hand as I climbed the stairs. The creak in the third step that always made Evelyn laugh. The faint scent of her lavender perfume still clinging to the fabric of our old curtains. This wasn't just a house. It was my battlefield. I walked into my study and opened the drawer where I kept a stack of envelopes. Mortgage documents, savings bonds, Evelyn's life insurance papers, the deed to this house. I spread them across the desk like a general laying out maps before a war. Michael thought I was weak. He thought I was old, tired, ready to be tucked away like an unused piece of furniture. But he had forgotten one thing. Every sacrifice I had made for him also gave me knowledge, leverage, and control. The fire inside me burned brighter than it had in years. I wasn't a burden. I was the foundation of everything he had. And soon he was going to learn what happens when you spit on the hands that built your world. The breaking point didn't come right away. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe Michael had spoken out of stress, or that Claire had pressured him into saying those words. I wanted to believe there was still some trace of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest after baseball practice. But then came the phone call. It was late the next evening. I was dozing in Evelyn's old recliner when my cell phone buzzed on the side table. Michael's name flashed across the screen. For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he realized how much damage his words had done. I answered, my voice careful. Michael? But what I heard wasn't an apology. He must have thought he'd hung up after speaking to Claire, but the line was still open. Dad's slipping, Michael muttered, his voice cold, detached. He forgot his wallet at the store today. The man can't even keep track of simple things anymore. Claire laughed softly in the background, the sound like glass breaking. He's been a burden for years, Michael. You're just admitting it now. The longer he stays in that house, the more dangerous it is. What if he leaves the stove on? What if he burns the place down? You don't want that on your conscience, do you? Michael's sigh cut through me like a blade. You're right. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow. We'll get the paperwork started for a facility. And once we sell that old house, we'll finally have enough for the down payment on the new place in the Heights. My grip on the phone tightened. The Heights. That neighborhood Michael had been drooling over for months. The one with the golf course, private security, and homes 3 times the size of mine. So that was it. Not concern for me, not love, just greed, wrapped in the disguise of responsibility. I sat frozen, listening to every word until the line finally clicked dead. The silence afterward was louder than any storm. My son wasn't just ashamed of me, he was plotting to discard me like yesterday's trash, to erase my existence from the very house I had built with my own blood and sweat. Something inside me snapped, the kind of snap that doesn't bend back. I looked around the living room, at the photos on the mantel, at the cracks in the ceiling I'd patched myself, at the oak floors Evelyn and I had refinished by hand. This wasn't just a house. This was my life, my legacy, my proof that I had lived, sacrificed, and built something real. And now my own son wanted to cash it in like a lottery ticket. I stood up, my body trembling, not from weakness, but from a surge of clarity. Evelyn's voice echoed in my mind, steady as the ticking clock. Don't let them take advantage of you, protect yourself. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing for war. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my house seemed to close in on me, whispering memories I wasn't ready to hear. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Evelyn's side of the bed was still untouched, her pillow faintly holding the scent of lavender fabric softener, even after all these years. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe I was slipping. I had forgotten my wallet at the store earlier. I'd stood there embarrassed, while the cashier gave me that patient smile people reserve for the elderly. Was that proof I couldn't live on my own anymore? I sat up, pressing my palms into my knees. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of the question echoing in my chest. Am I really a burden? I thought about the years Evelyn and I had spent building this life. She used to tell me I was the strongest man she'd ever known. But strength fades, doesn't it? Muscles weaken, memory falters, and suddenly the people you love see you not as a man, but as an obligation. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood in the dim glow of the fridge light. The house was so quiet that I could hear the old pipes humming, the steady tick of the clock, the faint rustle of wind outside. For a fleeting second, I wondered what it would feel like to let go, to surrender, to simply move into some facility where meals were served and responsibilities faded. It would be easier. No more arguments, no more feeling like a shadow in my own son's life. But then my eyes fell on the framed photo stuck to the fridge with a magnet. Michael at age 12, wearing the baseball uniform I worked 3 extra weekends to afford. His glove was too big for his hand, but his smile was wide, uncontainable. I remembered how proud he was when I built him a batting cage in the backyard with leftover lumber from the job site. A burden, that cage had been my blood, sweat, and time. Those tuition bills, that first car, the down payment on his house, all of it came from my sacrifices. I wasn't a burden. I was the very reason Michael had the life he enjoyed now. I set the glass down, my doubts dissolving into something sharper. Michael and Claire could lie to themselves, could dress their greed up as concern, but I knew the truth. Evelyn's voice came back to me. Strong this time, unshaken. Protect yourself. Don't let them take advantage. I tightened my grip on the counter, and with that small, deliberate motion, I chose my path. No more doubt. No more questioning my worth. I wasn't the burden. I was the reckoning. Have you ever been called a burden by someone you love? It cuts deeper than any knife, doesn't it? One word is enough to make you question your entire worth. But here's the truth. Sometimes the people who label us as useless are the very ones who built their lives on our sacrifices. They forget who paid the bills, who stayed up at night worrying, who gave them everything they have. So tell me, if you were in my shoes, standing in the house you built with your own hands and your own child was planning to throw you away, what would you do? Leave me your answer in the comments. Because the choice I made that night wasn't just survival, it was justice. The next morning, I rose before the sun. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud, alive with plans. I brewed a pot of black coffee, the smell filling the kitchen, bitter and sharp, just like the thoughts circling in my head. I pulled out the old lockbox from the hall closet, the one Evelyn used to tease me about. You keep more papers than a lawyer, she'd say with a laugh. Inside were the very documents Michael had no idea still existed. The original deed to the house, insurance policies, financial statements from decades past. Every nail, every beam of this home was in my name. Mine. As I spread the papers across the dining table, the oak surface reflected the morning light. Dust particles floated in the sunbeam, like tiny reminders of time passing. I ran my hand across the grain of the wood, remembering how Evelyn and I had chosen this table together, how we dreamed of family dinners that would stretch late into the night. Now it was my war table. I started making calls. The first was to the bank. I spoke clearly, firmly, requesting changes that only the rightful homeowner could make. By the time I hung up, I felt a sense of control settling over me like armor. The second call was to my attorney, a man named Franklin, who had helped Evelyn and me years ago with our wills. His voice was calm, reassuring. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "your son has no legal claim to your property, not unless you willingly sign it away. And from the sound of it, you're not about to do that." "Not now," I replied, my voice low. "Not ever." After the calls, I walked through the house slowly, as if seeing it for the first time. Every corner held a memory, every object a story. The rocking chair in the nursery where I used to lull Michael to sleep. The faint etchings on the doorframe marking his growth. Each line carved during birthdays Evelyn never let us forget. This wasn't just a house. It was a museum of my sacrifices. And if they thought they could sell it out from under me, they were about to learn what iron feels like when it's been tempered in fire. I opened the garage and stared at the old tool chest. The smell of oil and rust hit me immediately, familiar and grounding. I pulled out my ledger book, the one where I had recorded every expense, every payment I had ever made on Michael's behalf. College tuition, car repairs, even the wedding reception that drained my savings. Page after page of proof. Receipts written not in ink but in my blood and sweat. Later that afternoon, I drove past Michael's house. Snow crunched under my tires as I slowed near the driveway. Through the living room window, I saw them laughing. Michael and Claire, wine glasses in hand, like nothing had happened. Like their betrayal was just another casual Tuesday. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They thought they were safe. They thought they were clever. But what they didn't know was that I had already begun dismantling the very ground beneath their feet. Back home, I sat once more at the oak table. The papers spread out like weapons. I whispered into the empty room, as if Evelyn could hear me still. They called me a burden, but they're about to find out I am their foundation, and when a foundation cracks, the whole house comes down. The grandfather clock chimed behind me. Each strike was no longer a reminder of age, but of timing. And timing, I knew, was everything. The snowstorm hit 2 nights later. Thick flakes pounded the roof, rattling the windows like skeletal fingers. I sat in the living room, Evelyn's old blanket draped over my shoulders, the glow of the fireplace illuminating stacks of papers spread across the floor. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a war room. Each document was a weapon. Deeds, bank transfers, tuition receipts, insurance policies. I arranged them into piles, my hands steady, methodical. This wasn't nostalgia anymore. This was strategy. Every page proved one thing. Michael and Claire owed everything they had to me. I called Franklin again the next morning. His tone grew sharper as he absorbed the details. "You've got more than enough to protect yourself," he said. "If they push forward with their plan, they'll hit a wall of iron." "Not just iron," I corrected him. "Concrete. And concrete doesn't bend." After the call, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened Evelyn's jewelry box. The silver locket she wore every day was still inside, its chain cool against my palm. Inside the locket was a tiny photo of us from our first Christmas together. I closed it tightly and slipped it into my pocket. A reminder, a symbol. Evelyn had always believed in me when no one else did. Tonight she would be my compass. That evening, I received another call from Michael. His voice was carefully neutral, but I heard the undertone of calculation. "Dad, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we consider options for your care. Just to make sure you're safe." "Options," I repeated flatly. "Yeah, places where you won't have to worry about bills, maintenance, all that. Claire and I could really use the space here too. Maybe even turn your property into something the family can enjoy." My blood boiled, but my voice stayed calm. "I see." He didn't know it, but every word was being recorded. I'd installed an app on my phone just hours earlier, after Franklin suggested it might be useful, and it was already paying off. When the call ended, I sat in silence, listening to the storm outside. Snow pressed against the windows, muffling the world, but inside me there was no quiet, just the roar of betrayal fueling me forward. The next day, I made my move. I visited the county clerk's office, the fluorescent lights buzzing above as I slid my documents across the counter. The clerk raised an eyebrow, then nodded. "You're putting the house into a trust?" "That's right," I replied. My voice was steady, unshaken, effective immediately. When I walked out into the cold afternoon, the deed no longer belonged to me as a vulnerable individual. It belonged to the trust. Shielded by legal armor Michael couldn't touch. He could scheme, he could plan, but without my signature, his dreams of selling this house were ashes. That night, as I sat by the fireplace, the clock ticking steadily in the background, I felt Evelyn's presence beside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was taking back control. And I knew, deep in my bones, this was only the beginning. Because Michael thought he had cornered me. He thought I was weak, frail, dependent. But he had forgotten one crucial truth. I had built his world with my hands, and now I was dismantling it, piece by piece. The following Sunday, Michael and Claire showed up at my doorstep, unannounced. Their SUV crunched over the icy driveway, its headlights sweeping across the snow like searchlights. I knew why they were here. The storm had passed, but the real storm was just beginning. Claire was the first to speak when I opened the door. "Dad, we've been worried. We think it's time to make a real decision about your future." Michael stood behind her, his jaw tight, his eyes already scanning the house like a predator marking territory. I noticed the way his gaze lingered on the staircase, the living room, even the kitchen, as if he was measuring what would soon be his. I let them in. The house seemed to shrink with their presence, their polished boots tracking melted snow across the floor. Evelyn and I had refinished by hand. The grandfather clock chimed, its echo filling the silence. "Dad," Michael began, his voice rehearsed. "Claire and I spoke with a facility just outside town. It's comfortable, safe, and affordable. You'd have full-time care, meals, everything you need." I stared at him, my face unreadable. "Affordable for who?" He hesitated, just for a second. "For all of us." There it was, the truth slipping through the cracks. Claire jumped in quickly, her voice sugar-coated poison. "We just want what's best for you, but keeping up with this house, it's too much. You shouldn't have to worry about that anymore." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands calmly on the oak table. My war table. "And what about the house?" Michael glanced at Claire, then back at me. We'd sell it, use the money to... To what? I cut him off, my voice sharp. To buy that house in the Heights you've been drooling over? The one with the golf course? Michael's face went pale, but he didn't deny it. That silence was my confirmation. I stood slowly, my hand brushing the edge of Evelyn's locket in my pocket. My heart pounded, but my voice was steel. You think I'm a burden? You think you can erase me from the very life I built? But you've made one mistake. Michael frowned. And what's that? And what's that? I leaned forward, my words slicing the air. You underestimated me. I didn't tell him about the trust. I didn't tell him about the recordings. Not yet. That revelation would come later, when it mattered most. But in that moment, I crossed the line in my heart. There was no going back to being the quiet, forgiving father. When they left that evening, slamming the door behind them in frustration, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind of calm a soldier feels when he knows the battle has already begun. The point of no return wasn't a single action. It was a decision, carved deep inside me. I would fight, and this time I would win. For the next week, silence settled between us like a heavy fog. No phone calls, no surprise visits, no icy words disguised as concern. I almost allowed myself to believe they had given up, that maybe, just maybe, Michael had realized how cruel he'd been. On Thursday morning, my phone buzzed. Michael's name lit up the screen. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to answer. Dad, he said, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. Listen, I think I overreacted. Claire and I we want to make sure you're safe. Maybe we came on too strong. It was the kind of tone I used to hear when he was a boy, after he broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, or stayed out past curfew. Hesitant, apologetic, almost sincere. I swallowed hard, choosing my words carefully. You called me a burden, Michael. That doesn't just disappear. There was a pause. Then, quietly, I know. I shouldn't have said that. For a moment, hope flickered inside me. The image of Evelyn smiling, of Michael as a child clutching his bat in the backyard, rose unbidden. Maybe this was it. Maybe the boy I raised was still buried somewhere inside the man he had become. That evening, he stopped by with a bag of groceries. Claire wasn't with him. He set the bag on the counter, avoiding my eyes. Thought you might need a few things. Milk, bread, coffee. I studied him carefully. His shoulders were slumped, his smile forced. But there was something almost human in his effort. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. We even shared a meal, grilled cheese sandwiches, simple and warm, the kind Evelyn used to make on rainy days. Michael talked about work, about the stress of bills and mortgages, about the pressure of keeping up appearances. For a moment, it felt like the old days, father and son just talking. When he left, he hugged me. It was awkward, stiff, but it was a hug. Good night, Dad, he said, and I almost believed him. Almost. Because later that night, when I was cleaning up the kitchen, I found the slip of paper tucked under the bag of groceries. A glossy business card. The name of a realtor, bold and clear. My heart dropped into my stomach. Michael hadn't come to apologize. He hadn't come to reconnect. He had come to make sure I was calm, pliable, unsuspecting. The card was proof. Proof that behind the soft words and hollow hugs, the plan was still alive. I stood there in the kitchen, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the card trembling in my hand. The faint scent of Evelyn's lavender still clung to the curtains. I whispered into the empty room, my voice steady. They think I'm weak, but this is only the beginning. The false hope vanished as quickly as it came, and in its place, something sharper took root, resolve. 2 days after Michael's apology, I made my move. The realtor's card he'd left behind sat on my desk like a challenge, mocking me. He thought he was clever, hiding schemes beneath hugs and bags of groceries. But while he played at deception, I was already 5 steps ahead. That morning, I drove to the bank. The air outside was biting cold, the kind that stung your lungs and sharpened your thoughts. Inside, the sterile smell of polished marble and inked paperwork welcomed me like an old comrade. Mr. Hayes, the branch manager said, with a polite smile, "What can we do for you today?" "I'd like to make some changes," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I felt like a storm. Within an hour, my accounts were rearranged. Automatic payments canceled. Joint authorizations I'd foolishly left for Michael revoked. The nest egg I had quietly built over the years moved into a separate account under the protection of the trust I'd just finalized with Franklin. Every dollar was now shielded from greedy hands. But that wasn't the twist. Not yet. The real move came later, when I stopped at the county records office. There, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, I signed the final papers transferring my house, not just into a trust, but into a foundation. Evelyn's name was etched into the documents, immortalized as the symbol of everything I had built. From that moment on, the house was no longer just mine. It belonged to Evelyn Hayes Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to scholarships for local students. Untouchable, irrevocable, a fortress no greedy son could scale. By the time I stepped back into the cold air, I was smiling for the first time in months. Michael thought he could sell this house to fuel his dreams. What he didn't know was that the house was already gone, out of his reach forever. That evening, he called again. His voice was light, rehearsed. Dad, I talked to someone about your property, just to get an idea of what it's worth. Don't worry, nothing official yet. I let him talk. I let him spin his little web, convinced I was still the fly. Then I said, calmly, Michael, do whatever you think you need to, but just remember this house isn't yours to sell. There was a pause. What do you mean? You'll see, I said, and ended the call. For the first time, I imagined the look on his face when he found out, the shock, the anger, the realization that everything he thought he controlled was already slipping through his fingers. The grandfather clock chimed behind me, deep and steady. I touched the locket in my pocket and whispered, We're winning, Evelyn. Piece by piece, we're winning. And that was the twist. Not just fighting back, outsmarting them. Michael thought he held the power. He had no idea it was already gone. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to realize they were plotting against you the entire time? Betrayal doesn't just hurt, it transforms you. It forces you to see the truth hidden behind the smiles, the hugs, the empty words. My son thought he had everything under control. He thought I was blind, weak, and dependent. But the moment I protected my legacy, the balance shifted. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done? Would you have confronted him right away, or would you, like me, wait for the perfect moment to strike? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because trust me, when the reckoning came, it wasn't quiet. It was loud, public, and unforgettable. The showdown came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday afternoon when Michael invited me to lunch at a fancy restaurant downtown. He said he wanted to clear the air. I knew better. When Claire was involved, nothing was casual. I arrived wearing my best suit, the charcoal one. Evelyn insisted I keep for special occasions. The dining room smelled of roasted garlic and polished oak, chatter bouncing off the high ceilings. At a corner table, Michael and Claire sat waiting, both dressed as though they were sealing a business deal rather than meeting family. Dad, Michael said, rising to shake my hand. His smile stretched too thin. Glad you could make it. I sat down, my cane resting against the chair. Let's not waste time, Michael. Why am I here? Claire leaned forward, her manicured hands clasped like a prayer. We've been thinking about your future again. You deserve comfort, stability. We've already spoken with a realtor who's very interested in your property. There it was, the mask stripped away. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here to corner me. Michael's eyes glittered as he slid a folder across the table. These are preliminary numbers. The market is strong. If we sell now, we could get close to 900,000. With that, we could secure you a beautiful facility and still have enough left to invest for the family's future. The words hit me like acid. The family's future? I repeated. Or yours? His jaw tightened. Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The waiter arrived with menus, but the tension at the table was thick enough to choke on. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the fury I kept hidden under a calm expression. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Tell me, Michael, did you ever love this house? Or was it always just a price tag to you? He shifted uncomfortably, but Claire cut in smoothly. This isn't about love. It's about practicality. You can't keep living alone in that drafty old place. You'll end up hurting yourself. This way, everyone benefits. I let silence stretch, letting their own greed echo in their words. Then, with deliberate calm, I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it face up on the table. Michael frowned. What's that? I tapped the screen once. His own voice spilled out, crystal clear. Dad's slipping. He's a burden. Once we sell the house, we'll finally have enough for the heights. Claire's face drained of color. Michael's eyes widened, his hand darting toward the phone. But I was faster, sliding it back into my pocket. The silence that followed was deafening. The clink of silverware from nearby tables, the faint hiss of a cappuccino machine, all sounded louder against their panic. You recorded me, Michael hissed. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. I protected myself, the way you never intended to. The waiter returned to take orders, oblivious to the battlefield at our table. Michael forced a smile, but sweat glistened at his temples. Claire pressed her napkin against her lips, eyes darting to the other diners who were beginning to notice the tension. For the first time, the balance had shifted. They weren't the predators anymore. They were cornered prey. And this was only the beginning. The recording had been the first blow, but the real strike was still waiting. Michael's face was flushed, his composure slipping with every second. Claire fidgeted with her wine glass, her polished confidence cracking in front of the curious stares from nearby tables. "You don't understand, Dad," Michael said, his voice low, almost pleading. "We just wanted what's best for you. That recording, it was taken out of context." I leaned forward, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Out of context, you called me a burden. You plotted to sell my house, the house your mother and I built with our own hands. That isn't concern, Michael. That's greed." The table next to us fell silent, diners openly watching now. Michael glanced around nervously, but I didn't care. This wasn't just between us anymore. This was truth, stripped bare. Claire tried to recover, her voice smooth but shaking at the edges. "Mr. Hayes, you're being unfair. We've supported you for years. We only wanted to lighten your load." I laughed, bitter and cold. "Supported me? Every dollar you've ever spent has come from me. The tuition, the weddings, the down payments, the bills. You never supported me, you drained me." Gasps rippled through the restaurant as my voice carried. I didn't lower it. I wanted every ear in the room to hear. Michael's fists clenched on the table. "You're making a scene." "No, Michael," I said calmly. "I'm making the truth visible." With deliberate precision, I pulled another envelope from my coat pocket and placed it on the table. Inside were copies of the trust documents, stamped and notarized. "This house, the savings, the foundation in your mother's name, it's all protected now. You can't touch it. Not a single brick, not a single dollar." Michael's eyes widened, the blood draining from his face. He reached for the envelope, but I pressed my hand over it. "Don't bother. The originals are safe, where you'll never find them." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The clinking of cutlery stopped. All eyes were on us. "You did this behind my back?" Michael muttered, disbelief dripping from every word. "I did this because you forced me to," I answered. "Because you tried to strip me of everything I worked for. And because your mother asked me, before she died, never to let anyone take advantage of me again. I kept that promise today." Claire looked pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Michael sat frozen, his world collapsing in real time. For the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes, not of me as his father, but of me as a man who had just beaten him at his own game. I stood slowly, sliding the envelope back into my coat. Around us, whispers filled the restaurant like a rising tide. People would talk. They would remember. And that was exactly what I wanted. As I walked toward the exit, I didn't need to look back to know that Michael and Claire were left in ruins, their carefully crafted mask shattered in front of an audience they could never silence. When I stepped out of that restaurant into the crisp winter air, I felt lighter than I had in years. The snow had stopped falling, and sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering diamonds across the frozen streets. For the first time since Evelyn's passing, I felt her presence, not as an ache, but as a strength walking beside me. By the next morning, the phone calls began. Michael's voice was desperate now, no longer laced with arrogance. "Dad, we need to talk. Please, you blindsided me yesterday." I let the phone ring until it clicked to voicemail. There was nothing left to discuss. He had played his hand, and I had ended the game. Claire tried next. Her message was colder, calculated. "You've embarrassed us in public. Do you realize what people are saying? You've ruined Michael's reputation." I almost laughed. Reputation? What about the reputation they had tried to bury me under, the image of a weak old man too feeble to care for himself? Now the truth was out, and the whispers in that restaurant would carry farther than any lie they could spin. Meanwhile, Franklin confirmed everything was locked in place. "The trust is ironclad," he told me over the phone. "Even if Michael tried to contest it, he doesn't stand a chance. The foundation is protected. Your legacy is untouchable." Those words washed over me like warm sunlight. Untouchable. That's what Evelyn's memory deserved. That's what my sacrifices demanded. Over the next few weeks, Michael's visits stopped. The house was quiet again, but it was a comforting kind of silence. I filled the days tending to the small garden in the back, shoveling snow from the porch, polishing the grandfather clock until it gleamed. Every tick of its pendulum no longer felt like a countdown, but a declaration. I was still here, still standing. One afternoon, I walked past the elementary school 2 blocks away. Children poured out laughing, backpacks bouncing on their shoulders. I thought of Evelyn's foundation, of the scholarships it would provide. That house, our house, would not fuel greed. It would fuel dreams. It would give children the opportunities I had once fought so hard to give Michael. That realization filled me with peace. My home would live on, not as a trophy for my ungrateful son, but as a beacon for those who truly deserved it. And Michael, he would have to live with the knowledge that he lost, not because I was stronger, but because I was smarter, because I refused to be erased. That night, I sat in Evelyn's recliner, the fire crackling softly. I held her locket in my hand and whispered, "We did it, Evelyn. They tried to bury me, but I built the foundation too deep. They couldn't break it. They couldn't break us." The clock chimed, steady and strong, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not out of bitterness, but out of victory. Because I wasn't a burden. I was the reckoning. The weeks turned into months, and the sharp sting of betrayal slowly dulled into something else. Clarity. The anger that once burned like wildfire had cooled into a steady flame, a quiet strength that guided me every day. Life returned to its simple rhythm. I woke up early, brewed my coffee, and watched the sunlight creep through the curtains Evelyn had picked out so many years ago. The house no longer felt like a fortress under siege. It felt alive again, filled not with fear, but with purpose. The foundation began its work almost immediately. Franklin handled the logistics, but I made the final calls. We awarded the first scholarship to a girl named Anna, the daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. When Anna came to meet me, her eyes were wide, full of hope. "I'm going to study medicine," she said with trembling excitement. For a moment, I saw Michael as a boy again. The same spark, the same hunger for a future. Only this time, it was in someone who wouldn't squander it. That day, I realized something Evelyn had always tried to teach me. Family isn't just blood. Family is who you choose to lift, who you choose to protect. The town began to see me differently, too. Neighbors who once saw an old man shuffling down the street now stopped to chat, asking about the foundation, praising Evelyn's name. The whispers that had once branded me as frail now carried words like resilient and generous. It wasn't pride I felt, but vindication. I had rewritten the story they tried to force on me. As for Michael and Claire, they vanished from my life like smoke in the wind. Word spread quickly about what happened at the restaurant. People talked about greed, betrayal, and the man who stood his ground. They stopped showing their faces at community events. Even Michael's colleagues at work began to keep their distance. He had gambled everything on my silence, and when I refused to play along, he lost. There were nights, though, when doubt tried to creep back in. Nights when I wondered if I had been too harsh, if some part of me still owed him forgiveness. But then I would hear Evelyn's voice again, soft but firm. "Protect yourself, don't let them take advantage." And I knew I had done the right thing. One evening, I returned to the treehouse in the backyard, weathered but still standing. Michael and I had built it together when he was just a boy. I climbed the first few rungs of the ladder, my knees protesting but my heart determined. Inside, the air was musty with old wood and leaves, but I could still see the faint initials carved into the wall. M+D. For a long time, I stared at those letters. They weren't just marks on wood. They were a reminder of who we had been before greed poisoned everything. I touched the carving gently and whispered, "I loved you, son. I still do. But love doesn't mean surrender." That night, back in the house, I polished the grandfather clock until it shone. Its steady tick no longer taunted me with time slipping away. Instead, it reminded me that every second was a chance to live, to protect, to honor the sacrifices I had made. I wasn't the same man who had once trembled under the weight of his son's betrayal. I had been tested, broken, and reforged. And now, standing in the home Evelyn and I built, I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I had learned the greatest truth of all. They could strip me of titles, respect, even love, but they could never strip me of my will. And as long as I had that, I would never be a burden. I would always be the foundation. In the end, I realized something powerful. Being called a burden doesn't define you. What defines you are the sacrifices you've made, the battles you've fought, and the legacy you leave behind. Michael thought he could erase me, strip me of my worth. But instead, I carved my own justice. I turned his betrayal into strength, his greed into my weapon. So I'll ask you, have you ever been underestimated, pushed aside, told you were nothing more than a weight to carry? Remember this, you are not a burden. You are the foundation, and without the foundation, nothing stands. If my story struck a chord with you, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe. because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't anger. It's proving them wrong by standing taller than ever.